President Donald Trump posted on his Truth social account that he expects to be arrested on Tuesday. This comes as a New York prosecutor is viewing charges in a case where hush money was paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 presidential elections. Trump is urging his followers to protest. New York law enforcement officials have been making security preparations in case Trump is indicted. ABC News has not verified the claims, and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has not commented about the post or possible arrest.
Hey guys, Adam coming through. The phones at the Pentagon have stopped ringing the way they used to. Empty chairs sit where decorated generals once planned global strategy. And inside the White House, Donald Trump is watching something unfold that he never expected to see. The military leaders he purged in 2025 aren't coming back. But worse than that, new ones are now walking out the door.
Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news. President Trump has just fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his top military advisor. He made the announcement on social media. Quoting from his post, "I want to thank General Charles C.Q. Brown for his over 40 years of service to our country, including as our current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's a fine gentleman and an outstanding leader, and I wish a great future for him and his family." The president went on to say, "Today I'm honored to announce that I'm nominating Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Kane to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Now, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had previously called for General Brown's firing because of his, quote, woke focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the military. Hegseth on a radio show last fall said, or a podcast last fall said, first of all, you got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And he went on to talk about how any general involved with DEI efforts should be fired. Either you're in for war fighting and that's it, he said.
And the institution he tried to remake in his own image is showing cracks that no amount of loyalty oaths can repair. Let me tell you what's actually happening because the media is completely missing the real story here. Trump did something unprecedented.
Breaking news in the ongoing firings in the Trump administration. President Donald Trump has abruptly fired General C.Q. Brown as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Brown is a former fighter pilot and respected officer. His 16 months on the job had been consumed with the war in Ukraine and the expanded conflict in the Middle East. Trump says that he is nominating Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Kane to be the next chairman. Trump acted despite support for Brown among key members of Congress.
He didn't just replace a few generals. He systematically removed over a dozen of the highest-ranking military officers in the United States Armed Forces. We're talking about General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the single highest-ranking military officer in the country. We're talking about Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the chief of naval operations. We're talking about General David Allvin from the Air Force.
It's not entirely unexpected, especially since the new defense secretary has been talking about this before he was even being considered for that job. How much of this is about DEI?
Well, I think it depends on your definition and what that looks like. And I will say that when Hegseth got confirmed as the defense secretary, that he stood next to General C.Q. Brown, and who is the president's top military advisor, effectively, and said that he looked forward to working with him. So we actually saw him strike quite a different tone after Hegseth had gone through the confirmation process. It was actually at the Pentagon. But one thing that was clear was this is something that has been long rumored for weeks now, that this was in the works, that this was going to happen, that they had not changed their minds on that feeling initially of General C.Q. Brown ever since you heard those comments from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And just to drive home how unusual this is, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Anderson, typically stays regardless of who the president is. Even if they change parties and it's a different administration, they stay for that 4-year term.
These weren't mid-level bureaucrats getting shuffled around. These were the people who run the actual military. The people who make the decisions about how America defends itself. The people who sit in the room when the president discusses war and peace. And Trump's justification? He said these leaders were too focused on what he called woke initiatives. Too concerned with diversity programs and social issues. Not focused enough on actual war-fighting capability. So he brought in Defense Secretary Hegseth, who shared his vision, and together they cleaned house. They pushed out anyone who didn't align with their view of what the military should be. That was 2025. And for a while, it looked like the strategy might work. The military absorbed the shock. New people came in. The institution kept functioning. But now, in early 2026, something different is happening. Something that should terrify the White House, because the resignations aren't stopping. They're actually accelerating. In October 2025, a Marine colonel resigned publicly, citing constitutional concerns. He said he couldn't serve under an administration that he believed was undermining constitutional governance. That was significant. That was a senior officer willing to sacrifice his career to make a statement. But at the time, it seemed like an isolated incident. One person, one resignation, nothing more. But now we're seeing more. Quietly, without the fanfare of media coverage, other officers are making the same choice. They're not holding press conferences. They're not issuing dramatic statements. They're just quietly submitting their papers and walking away. And the cumulative effect of these quiet departures is starting to show. Here's what the viral YouTube videos aren't telling you. Those dramatic clips with titles about mass resignations and generals quitting in waves, most of that is recycled footage from 2025 wrapped in new narration designed to make it look like things are still falling apart in the same dramatic way. But the reality is both quieter and more dangerous for Trump, because the resignations happening now aren't the dramatic public resignations that make headlines. They're the quiet ones. The ones where experienced officers look at what's happening in Washington, look at the impeachment votes, look at the investigations, look at the chaos, and decide they don't want to be part of it anymore. These aren't people quitting in protest with cameras rolling. These are people calculating that their careers, their families, their futures are better served by leaving now rather than being associated with what comes next. And that's actually more damaging to the military than any single dramatic resignation could be. Because it's a slow bleed of experience and institutional knowledge. It's the people who know how things work deciding they don't want to be around to see how things end. Now let's talk about General Dan Kane because he's central to understanding what's actually happening in the Pentagon right now. Kane is one of the new appointees, someone who came in after the 2025 purges. He's the kind of officer Trump wanted, focused on war fighting, not distracted by social initiatives, aligned with the administration's vision. And right now, Kane is doing exactly what military leaders are supposed to do. He's planning operations. He's focused on Iran. He's dealing with real national security threats. But here's the problem that the administration doesn't want to acknowledge. Even with Kane in place, even with the new leadership structure functioning, the institution is showing strain because Kane can't be everywhere. He can't replace the dozens of experienced officers who have left. He can't magically recreate the institutional knowledge that walked out the door with each resignation. He can only work with the people he has, and the people he has are fewer and less experienced than they were 2 years ago. The impeachment narrative is using all of this. House Resolution 353 now has 287 votes with 42 Republicans defecting. That's real momentum. That's significant. And part of the case Democrats are making is that Trump has created chaos throughout the government, including in the military. They point to the 2025 purges. They point to the October 2025 resignation. They point to the quiet departures happening now. And they say, this is what happens when you prioritize loyalty over competence. This is what happens when you fire experienced officers because they don't share your political views. This is what instability looks like. And here's the thing that makes this narrative so powerful. It's not entirely wrong. Yes, the military is still functioning. Yes, operations are still happening. Yes, General Kane is planning for Iran, but the institution has been disrupted. The normal processes of succession and promotion have been bypassed. People have left who shouldn't have left. And the cumulative effect of all those departures is a military that's less experienced, less stable, and less prepared than it was before Trump started his purge. The Pentagon shakeups in 2026 are continuing, but they're not the dramatic headlines you see on YouTube. They're the quiet retirements of people who've had enough. They're the early exits of officers who look at the political situation and decide they don't want to be around for what's coming. They're the slow erosion of institutional capacity that happens when experienced people leave and are replaced by people who are still learning their jobs. And this matters right now because of what's happening in Congress. The March 1st Senate impeachment vote is looming. The votes are being counted, the pressure is building. And every piece of evidence that Trump has created instability, including the military departures, is being used to make the case for conviction. Think about the timeline. February 2025, the initial purges. Over a dozen senior generals and admirals removed. October 2025, the Marine colonel resigns publicly citing constitutional concerns. February 2026, quiet departures continue. The pattern is clear. It's not a single moment of crisis, it's a sustained erosion of military leadership that started with Trump's decision to prioritize loyalty over experience, and that continues to this day. The YouTube videos showing dramatic resignations happening right now are largely fiction. They're using old footage and dramatic narration to create content that gets views. But the reality they're pointing to, the reality of a military institution under stress, that reality is genuine. It's just playing out more quietly than the videos suggest. So let's break down what this actually means for Trump and for the military going forward. First, the 2025 purges were real and they were extraordinary. Firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs isn't normal. Removing over a dozen senior officers in a single wave isn't normal. The military doesn't operate that way under normal circumstances. Trump made a deliberate choice to disrupt the institution in order to remake it in his image. Second, the consequences of that disruption are still playing out. The Marine colonel who resigned in October 2025 was just the most visible example. Behind him, others have made the same choice quietly. They've looked at what's happening and decided they don't want to be part of it. And each departure erodes the institutional knowledge and experience that the military depends on. Third, the military is still functioning, but it's functioning with less experienced leadership. General Kane and others are doing their jobs. Operations are being planned. Iran is being monitored, but the margin for error is smaller. The institutional resilience is weaker. And if a real crisis hits, the military will be responding with leaders who have less experience and less institutional memory than they would have had without the purges. Fourth, the political damage from all of this is real, and it's being used against Trump right now. The impeachment narrative about chaos and instability isn't just Democratic spin. It's based on actual events. The purges happened. The resignations happened. The quiet departures are happening. And members of Congress, including the 42 Republicans who've already defected, are looking at that record and making judgments about whether Trump should remain in office. The March 1st Senate vote is the deadline. That's when the impeachment trial reaches its conclusion. That's when senators will have to decide whether to convict or acquit. And between now and then, every piece of evidence about Trump's impact on institutions, including the military, will be scrutinized and debated. The military purges of 2025 are part of that evidence. The October 2025 resignation is part of that evidence. The quiet departures of early 2026 are part of that evidence. And the cumulative story they tell is one of a president who prioritizes loyalty over competence, who disrupts institutions rather than strengthening them, who creates instability rather than stability. Whether that story is enough to reach the 67 votes needed for conviction remains to be seen, but the momentum is real. The 287 House votes with 42 GOP defections show that. The Senate reportedly having 62 votes leaning toward conviction shows that. The gap is narrowing, and every new development, every new resignation, every new piece of evidence pushes more senators toward the conviction column. Here's what you need to understand about the current state of the military as we head into this critical period. The institution is battered but standing. It's functioning but strained. It's led by people who were chosen for loyalty rather than experience, and that choice has consequences. The quiet departures of experienced officers are a symptom of deeper problems. They're a sign that people inside the institution see things they don't like and are choosing to leave rather than fight. The military will continue to function. It will continue to defend the country. It will continue to plan operations and respond to threats. But it will do so with less institutional wisdom, less experienced leadership, and less stability than it had before Trump began his purge. And that's a cost that will be paid, not in political drama, but in actual military capability. The YouTube videos with dramatic titles about mass resignations are mostly fiction. They're entertainment, not journalism. But the reality they're exaggerating is real. The military is under stress, leaders are leaving, and the institution is being reshaped in ways that will have consequences for years to come. As the March 1st Senate vote approaches, expect to hear more about this. Expect Democrats to hammer the narrative that Trump has destabilized the military. Expect Republicans to defend the purges as necessary to refocus the military on warfighting. Expect the debate to be fierce and the votes to be close. And through it all, expect the quiet departures to continue. Officers who've had enough will keep walking out the door. The institutional bleed will keep happening, and the military that emerges on the other side will be different from the one that existed before Trump took office. Whether that difference makes the military stronger or weaker is a question that won't be answered by political debates or impeachment votes. It will be answered by how the military performs when the next crisis hits, and by then, it will be too late to undo the damage. So here's where we stand in February 2026. A president who purged the military's top leadership. A series of resignations, both public and quiet. A military that's functioning but strained. An impeachment vote approaching with momentum on the side of conviction. And a country watching to see what happens next. The freakout in the White House is real. Trump sees what's happening. He sees the resignations. He sees the impeachment votes. He sees the Republicans breaking ranks. And he knows that the institution he tried to remake is showing signs of strain that could become his undoing. The military leaders who quit aren't just statistics. They're statements. They're people who looked at what this administration represents and decided they wanted no part of it. And their departure, whether dramatic or quiet, is a verdict on the state of American leadership. Stay tuned. The March 1st vote is coming, and the military, battered and strained, will be watching along with the rest of us.